empowers and becomes action. I'm doing this segment on YouTube Urban View, so if you're listening, you can also see it on YouTube. Hi, YouTube. Welcome back. Hope you all are well. Missed y'all yesterday. But I wanted to have a conversation, and this is going to be a brief conversation about the report that came out on the race massacre that took place in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And in 1921, we're all aware of a Black Wall Street. We were aware of what it was. And if you're not, then we aren't going to get into that right now. You should know what Black Wall Street was about. I encourage you to read it or to read about it. But the Department of Justice had, at the insistence of amazing attorneys like Demario Solomon Simmons and all of the folks who are a part of the Justice for Greenwood effort. And when we are trying to get Demario back on the show, because I really want to have a much more in-depth conversation with him about this report. But I think it's important that you all be aware that the Department of Justice, under the leadership of Kristen Clark, and yes, I know Merrick Garland is the Attorney General, but Kristen Clark is the Attorney General for Black people, as far as I'm concerned. And they put out a report. And earlier in the week, Kristen Clark, a brilliant attorney who I don't know personally, but I had worked alongside with organizations she's a part of. She's done some amazing work. I have the ultimate respect for her and what she has had to navigate in this time. But the report is out, and I want to share with you what was in the report. And for those of you who are new to this show, new to Urban View, new to me, I believe in Sankofa, which is an African principle, a West African principle. It's a part of the Adinkra symbol system. I know a lot of us, when we think of symbols used in writing and conveying messages, we often think about hieroglyphs. And yes, hieroglyphs are a thing, and you see them throughout the pyramids, all throughout Nubia, and then later into Egypt, because a lot of times people think that Egypt started these things, and no, it started in Nubia, and then whatever. But writing with symbols is not something that only people in the eastern portion of the continent of Africa experienced. It was something that was experienced throughout the entirety of the continent. And so when people say that Africans had an oral history and they didn't write things, I mean, yes, but no, right? So there are layers to these things. There are nuances to these things. And so I want to share with you just the summary, the executive summary. I'm going to read the report, because I know that for a lot of us having time to sit down and read these things, it's a lot. We got a lot going on. And so I want us to be aware of what was happening, because Sankofa, that principle from the Adinkra symbol system, it says to us that we have to go back to the past if we want to understand how we got to where we are. And we certainly have to go back to the past if we want to move forward into the future. And so we're going to have that conversation today, because I think it's really important that we are aware of what they did, so that we know what they're doing, so that we can be prepared for what they fitna do. And I said fitna intentionally because I'm multilinguistical. Is linguistical a word? I don't think linguistical is a word. I'm multilinguist capable, whatever. I speak English. Still speak a little bit of German, speak some Spanish, and I speak African-American vernacular English as my native tongue, and a little bit of patois when I have to call on my mother's voice. But in the executive summary, which you can find online, and Jonah, please put this out on Blue Sky. But they say the following: on the night of May 31st, 1921, a violent attack by as many as 10,000 white Tulsans destroyed the thriving Black community of Greenwood, Oklahoma. Keep that number in mind, 10,000. A prosperous era, which was Greenwood, Oklahoma, a prosperous era often referred to as Black Wall Street. The attack, which lasted into the afternoon of June 1st, was so systematic and coordinated that it transcended mere mob violence. Okay, this wasn't just a mob gone wild. This wasn't just a bunch of, hay chewing and tobacco spitting people just getting their guthers up and drinking too much and going on a tailspin through the Black community. No. This was coordinated. 10,000 white community members. Seeking to understand and acknowledge the scope and the impact of the massacre, the U.S. Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division, under the Emmett Till Unsolved Civil Rights Crime Act. I know a lot of times people are like, well, we need a crime bill that's just for us. We need a hate crimes bill that's just for us. You're actually going to hear about a number of the hate crimes bills that are already on the books that are specifically used to advocate on behalf of Black people, and which were created in response to hate crimes that Black people experience. Now, none of them are called the Black People Hate Crime or the Protect Black People from Hate Crimes law, but that's okay, because they do what we need them to do. And I know a lot of us get stuck on those things. I encourage you to delve deeper. Don't get stuck on the superficial. Look at what the legislation is designed to do. Under the Emmett Till Unsolved Civil Rights Crime Act, recently announced that its cold case unit was going to review the events of 1921. Now, we took issue with this review on this show. I'll remind you, when Demario Solomon Simmons was with us the last time, what we learned was that they were not going to subpoena records. They were not going to use the full weight of their power and capacity as the Department of Justice. So we glad they did the report, but there could have been more done. So we're gonna appreciate what we appreciate, but damn it, y'all could have done so much more than this. They say from the beginning of that effort, it has been clear that no avenue of prosecution now exists for these crimes, meaning there's no criminal venue. The youngest potential defendant would be more than 115 years old today, and the relevant statutes of limitations have long since expired. Nevertheless, as the federal government's first thorough reckoning with this devastating act, our resulting review officially acknowledges, illuminates, and preserves for history the horrible ordeals of the massacre's victims. They go on to talk about the fact that there was this report that was initially done in the immediacy following the attack. They say the review conducted by the Cold Case Unit involved speaking with survivors and their families, examining firsthand accounts, and studying primary materials, meaning materials that were present at the time, that were created at the time, that were specifically related to what's happening. These weren't materials that cited other materials. The primary materials, including this investigative report from June of 1921 by the Justice Department's Bureau of Investigation. They attached the report to this document so you can see it, but that they say that when they did this initial review in 1921, it took less than a week to research and write. The incident was characterized as a small, half-hearted attempt at a lynching. Oh, the good old boys tried to do a lynching, but they couldn't even get the lynching. It was much ado about nothing. They said in that initial report in 1921 that the riot was not the result of racial feeling, and implied that Black men were responsible for the massacre, and concluded that the perpetrators had not violated any federal laws. This was the conclusion in 1921. So you know how we might be like, how could they decide that? How could they come out after all this evidence and not find that anything criminal had been done? Well, you know exactly how that could happen. The convicted criminal in chief is about to be inaugurated on Monday. You know damn well how there can be hearings and evidence. And yet when whiteness decides to unite to defend its ability to exist, this is what happens. They go on to talk about the fact that the story itself of what happened itself. They say that the trigger for the violence of the Tulsa Race Massacre was the kind of unfounded condemnation that at the time commonly justified unspeakable treatment of Black men. The allegations of a white man led police to arrest 19-year-old Dick Rowland for allegedly assaulting a white woman who operated the elevator that he used. A local newspaper then sensationalized the story, and soon a mob of white Tulsans gathered at the courthouse demanding a lynching. Now, you might be saying, how could it be that a newspaper might just spur all this sorts of negative activity? Well, we're seeing that happening right now, where newspapers are doing crazy things like blaming a mayor for being a part of a presidential delegation to Ghana when LA started burning on fire, as opposed to dealing with what was really happening at the ground. And now there is this groundswell of activity to try to have her removed for something that she had nothing to do with, except for the fact that she was literally doing her job, got on a military plane so that she could have full access of communication on her way back immediately upon learning of what was happening. But the media often shapes the story in a way that preserves whiteness and whiteness' ability to exist and to thrive and to adapt. And that's exactly what was happening in 1921. So a local newspaper sensationalizes the story. A mob of white Tulsans gathers outside the courthouse demanding a lynching. Black men from Greenwood, says the report, came to the courthouse to protect Rowland. So brothers was organized and had weapons. And a lot of y'all say we need to stock up. Well, let's see how that went. I'm not saying we shouldn't. I'm just saying, let's be aware of what happened. Black men from Greenwood came to the courthouse to protect Rowland. The white mob saw this effort to save Rowland as a challenge to the social order and quickly recruited others. The mob grew. A confrontation broke out. And when someone fired a shot, quote, all hell broke loose. Violence escalated quickly. Local police deputized hundreds of white residents, but basically giving them immunity to engage in criminal policing behavior, similar to the type of full immunity that your commander, your convict in chief, is about to give to all the police everywhere across the nation, because some of y'all said she wasn't Black. So violence escalated. And I meant all that shade. Local police deputized hundreds of white residents, many of whom had been advocating for a lynching and had been drinking, so they're sloppy drunk at this time. Law enforcement officers helped to organize these special deputies, as well as other white Tulsans, into the martial forces that ravaged Greenwood. Literally, the police, the Klan, the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, all on the same page. I'm sorry, that's 2020, 2025. This was 1921. Over the next several hours, they looted, burned, and destroyed 35 city blocks while Greenwood's residents tried desperately to defend their homes. Some Black residents were shot or otherwise assaulted, and many were arrested or detained. Law enforcement actively participated in the destruction. Law enforcement actively participated in the destruction, disarming Black residents. So took their guns and their weapons, confiscating their weapons, and detaining many in makeshift camps under armed guard. Put them in concentration camps. There are allegations that some members of law enforcement participated in arsons and murders. Contrary to the agent's 1921 report, the situation did not spontaneously grow out of control. Rather, what had initially been sporadic and opportunistic violence became systematic, yielding a much more devastating result due to coordinated efforts among white residents and law enforcement entities. They were on the same page. The white community, the white law enforcement, and white anti-Blackness were on code. They were in alignment. Moreover, says the report, although the 1921 report asserts that the massacre, then called a riot, was not the result of racial feeling, perpetrators of the massacre overtly expressed and acted upon racial violence. As the fires consumed Greenwoods, many Black families fled for their lives. White residents chased them across and beyond the city, taking men, women, children, the elderly, and the infirm into custody. The destruction of the district was total. The survivors were left with nothing. After the devastation, city officials promised to help Greenwood rebuild, but the white-led government of Tulsa not only failed to do so, but put up obstacles to residential reconstruction. Kind of like how the government of Mississippi is deciding to block access to water purification dollars for Jackson, Mississippi, because it's led by Black people. It's predominantly Black city. So what has happened in the past is still happening. They say white local leaders rejected outside aid, claiming they could handle the recovery, but then provided little to no financial support. Instead, claiming the area was best suited for industrial use, they imposed harsh new fire codes that priced residents out of the area. Altadena, beware, although a court later enjoined those provisions. Compounding the injustice, insurance companies denied Black residents of Greenwood compensation due to the riot clause in their policies. Legal attempts to hold the city accountable also failed. Black residents of Tulsa were left with no avenue for redress. The passage of time did not clear the path to justice. And they discussed the fact that in 2003 and 2020, the families persisted and did everything they could to move forward. And finally, in the executive summary, this Justice Department review concludes that today, had the laws of today been on the books of 1921, federal prosecutors could have pursued hate crimes charges against the massacre's perpetrators under hate crimes, including Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Hate Crime Prevention Act and the criminal provisions of the Fair Housing Act. The government could have prosecuted the destruction of Black churches under the Church Arson Prevention Act. Officers, police officials, and others who participated in the massacre could have faced charges for depriving Greenwood residents of their constitutional rights for civil rights conspiracy. And none of it happened because they were on the same page. None of that happened because whiteness and the power of the law at that time were like one mighty fist, like Grandma said in Soul Food. Now the perpetrators are long dead. Statute of limitations for all civil rights charges expired decades ago, and there are no viable avenues for further investigation. We got to go to commercial break. I want you all to read this report. We're going to delve into it more deeply with Demario Solomon Simmons in the days to come. We got a lot of work to do, y'all. We'll be right back after this.